So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to our midday conference, Deputy Prime Minister. Also, I see there my new bosses. Next week is the General Assembly of the Martin Center, Mr. Becker and Madam McGuinness. Looking forward for having you here and also for future cooperation, as also Mr. Hack. Yes, I mentioned Martin Center. Martin Center is next year we are going to be 20 years old, and in my office floor, office wall, there is a first European View journal, which is now it's 20 years, more than 25 years ago, because the journal was before the Martin Center, and then it has the main title is surprising Europe's challenge of economic growth. 25 years ago. So it doesn't mention, the capitals union maybe, well, inside the articles, but it kind of shows where we are a little bit on the debate. Of course, I'm very young, but I still remember that, don't laugh. So I'm very young. I remember a little bit how the economic debate went. Actually, 20 years ago, it was not so different than today. We spoke a lot, you remember, about demographic change, demographic challenge, the growth. We were thinking about Lisbon agenda, whether we are able to do it or whether we are not able to do it. But then 2007, 2008, we had, of course, the economic and financial crisis, which then was labeled as a Euro crisis, which is not exactly true. But we were then tackling with that, then, and recovering. Then 2015 came the immigration crisis, and then came COVID, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But during all these 20 years of period, we have had many great ideas. Single market and, capitals market union among the others. But now, fast forward, we find ourselves in a certain economic situation. First of all, the public balances of the EU member states are very, very, troublesome, huge deficit. But in addition, we have challenges. We have the defense spending pushing us, which requires money. We have the economic transition, so Green Deal or related, and now we find ourselves in the situation that in fact the companies and money is not coming in, but it requires investment, again money. And then again, as I mentioned, the demographic change. And so now we are going back, again on those great ideas and great, possibilities, and really, harnessing those opportunities. And as Owen always points out about, capital market union, it's not only about companies or SMEs or finding the real financing within the European Union, but on the issue of capital. In fact, Europe has money. If you compare the savings rate in United States comparing to Europe, the difference is huge in favor of Europe. But the question is that the money is in accounts, and the question is how to mobilize that. And so in this conference, in this discussion, we are going to focus on the idea of actually Flemish Christian Democrats on Benelux Bourse. So do it a little bit now in the defense debate. If you look a little bit what is happening in many countries or regions, you have the regional cooperation in defense, and start it small, start it regional, and see how making the integrated setting in Benelux countries could be model and motivation for the European Union. Because to put it other way around, if we don't manage to do it in Benelux countries, it will be very, very challenging for the whole European Union. So, this is actually, it's not, so in the way it's a regional dynamics and question, but having a huge European implications. So with these words, I welcome you. Thank you for coming. It's a full house. And, Deputy Prime Minister, please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Tommy, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, also for the invitation and the opportunity to exchange views on this topic. And this subject may seem, at first glance, very technical, but it actually goes to the heart of Europe's economic and geopolitical future. These days, we often talk about competitiveness, about strategic autonomy, about the energy transition, about defense, about innovation. And ultimately, however, it all boils down to the same question: what role does Europe wish to play in a world that is becoming increasingly unpredictable and geopolitical? And behind all these grand ambitions lies one question that is rarely asked outright: how are we going to fund all this? And Europe is certainly not short of plans these days. Quite the contrary, we have ambitious climate targets. We want to invest in artificial intelligence. We want to boost our defense capabilities. We want to keep our industry competitive whilst making it more sustainable. We want to reduce our dependence on other power blocks. But anyone who is honest will know that all these ambitions stand or fall on the funding behind them. And that is precisely where the rub lies today. Europe has a vast and highly diversified capital base. Our citizens, as already said, hold substantial savings. Our companies are among the most innovative in the world. Our universities generate world-class knowledge, and yet we are failing to mobilize the capital on a sufficient scale to drive growth. All too often, we fail to turn our savings into investments, our innovation into champions, and our economic strength into geopolitical clouds. Too many European companies, when they are serious about scaling up, end up moving to the United States to raise funding. Too many promising startups cannot find the depth of capital markets in Europe that is needed to scale up globally. Too much European savings money remains sitting idle in the bank accounts, whilst our economy is in need of productive investment. That is a paradox we can no longer afford. Because in today's world, access to capital is not merely an economic lever, it's a power. It determines who develops technology, who leads industrial transitions, and who can achieve strategic autonomy. But let's also be honest about the reality. A truly comprehensive European Capital Markets Union has been under decision for decades. To stimulate and accelerate that debate, I invited Mario Draghi to the informal ECOFIN and Eurogroup meeting in Ghent 2 years ago. That was a deliberate decision to give new impetus to the European debate on competitiveness, investment, and financial integration. Although the response at the summit in Ghent was virtually unanimous, progress remains too slow. Perhaps we should then ask ourselves a different question. Why aren't countries that are willing to do so taking the lead? Why shouldn't Benelux countries do once again what they have done so often in European history: lead the way? The customs union was established here first. Economic integration was first tested here. Cross-border cooperation first took shape here. What later became European policy often began as a Benelux experiment. Why couldn't that be the case again today? That is why my party, the CD&V, is calling for a Benelux Bourse and a Benelux Capital Markets Union, not as an alternative to a real European Capital Markets Union, but precisely as a stepping stone towards it. Together, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg form an economy worth over 1.7 trillion euros. This puts us on a par with major global economies. What's more, our economies are also deeply intertwined. Our logistics hubs are interconnected. Our financial sectors complement one another. Our technology ecosystems reinforce one another. Our markets are already integrated in many respects. In fact, our bourse infrastructures already share key foundations. Brussels and Amsterdam already operate within the same Euronext structure. Luxembourg has unique expertise in international financial markets, so the building blocks are already in place. What is lacking is the political will to commit to genuine integration. Imagine a Belgian investor investing seamlessly in Dutch or Luxembourg shares as if they were a single domestic market, thereby giving companies access to a much larger and deeper pool of venture capital. Imagine us developing a joint Benelux index that attracts global capital, mobilizes institutional investors, and substantially increases our economic visibility. Imagine, moreover, that innovative scale-ups no longer have to seek funding outside Europe at an early stage, but can continue to grow within an integrated Benelux capital market. That way, we will build the financial scale our businesses need to remain competitive in a world of US hyperscale financing and Chinese state capital. That way, we will make our economy more resilient and our financing more strategic. Of course, that can be done in the blink of an eye. It requires political negotiations, legal harmonization, and institutional cooperation. It will raise questions about taxation, about supervision, about market structures. But when has a meaningful breakthrough ever been achieved without such complexity? The history of European integration teaches us precisely that major advances rarely arise from simplicity, but from a willingness to organize progress despite complexity. The alternative is that we continue to accept that European companies have to seek funding elsewhere, that European savings do not contribute sufficiently to European growth, and that we continue to talk about strategic autonomy without building the financial infrastructure that makes that autonomy possible. Ladies and gentlemen, it is no coincidence that this project could be launched in the Benelux. After all, historically speaking, we are not only the cradle of European cooperation, but also of the Bourse itself. From Bruges to Antwerp, from Antwerp to Amsterdam, a financial model was developed here that was emulated worldwide. And the criticism of this proposal of Benelux Bourse is predictable. It's too ambitious. That's true. But the relevant question is not whether it's ambitious. The relevant question is whether Europe can still make progress today without such ambition. Are we not too often pushing our ambitions aside through excessive realism? Because our single market really requires ambition, just as the euro required ambition, just as Schengen required ambition. Even back then, there were those who said it was too early, too difficult, too complicated. But today, we cannot imagine Europe without the euro or Schengen. And in a few years' time, we will have to say the same about our single market. Because if 3 countries can demonstrate that deeper capital market integration boosts innovation, mobilizes savings, and supports strategic autonomy, then I believe the European debate will change fundamentally. And that ultimately is the essence of my argument and that of my party. Not that the Benelux would be an alternative to Europe, but that the Benelux can help drive Europe forward once again. If we are serious about European competitiveness, we must be serious about funding it. If we are serious about strategic autonomy, we must be serious about the markets that make that autonomy possible. If we are serious about deepening European integration, we must also be prepared to take bold new institutional steps. That is why I believe that the creation of a Benelux Bourse and a Benelux Capital Markets Union should not be seen as a niche initiative for financial specialists, but as a strategic project that lies at the heart of Europe's economic future. It could become a tool to better finance innovation, anchor businesses more firmly, enable citizens to participate more in economic growth, and give Europe the financial clout that matches its geopolitical ambitions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. That was very, very interesting and a very good start to the debate. My name is Owen from the Martin Centre. Delighted to see you all today. Delighted our speakers could take time out of their busy schedules to talk about a Benelux Bourse today. It's interesting that the Minister alluded to, Belgium or Flanders, long before there was Belgium, being the birthplace of the Bourse. And that how that idea developed in Antwerp and ultimately in Amsterdam. But what I find fascinating now is that European households, not all European households, but a lot of continental European households, they're among the least likely in the developed world to invest in the capital markets. So something really has changed. And I think maybe Mairead might feel the same. You really notice it when you come from a different type of environment into a Belgian environment. My wife, who's also Irish, did the Flemish integration course several years ago as mandated by the Flemish authorities. And a very nice middle-aged Flemish woman told her that the biggest thing you will have to realize about living in Flanders is just how risk adverse the investment and the savings culture is here in Belgium, and I think that's it's very true, and I think we need to say that, and I think the Benelux is a microcosm of a lot of the obstacles which face capital markets union at a European level. The Belgians and the Dutch have very different investment cultures, but I just think, and I think the Minister alluded to it, if we keep waiting for some EU-level magic bullet to drive capital markets union forward, then I think we're going to be waiting here a very long time. It's already 12 years since my first event in Brussels about capital markets union. Then we talked about this big new impetus caused by the incoming Juncker administration. Well, here we are. But we have about 45 minutes for discussion. We've got to work for our lunch, which is okay. Mairead, I might start with you first. You were inside the Commission. You're a former Commissioner that had responsibility for driving forward capital markets union. What do you, based on your 4 years, what do you kind of view as the single biggest obstacle?
I suppose it was lovely to hear the Deputy Prime Minister, and we worked well together when I was a Commissioner. And what struck me when I took on the portfolio was, even though I was an MEP for 16 years prior to that, I never really was involved in discussions around banking union or capital markets union. And that spoke to the fact that this territory belongs to the specialists, to the inner community who talk inwards, not outwards. And the first thing I did when I became Commissioner was ask about things like, have we done research about, people? What do people think about investing or saving, or have we any idea of their level of financial skills? So that was the first thing. In terms of the fact, as we've gone through, this is decades in the making. And I wrote down, which I tend to do, all sorts of things, but I wrote down, when I heard the term great ideas, Tom, I think you used that one, I said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And to some extent, we are at a point now, and I'm sure we'll come to it in more detail, where you can't keep talking about it. I made many fine speeches on it. I suppose this speech, I have to say, was the first that said, okay, what we've said isn't working, let's look at other options. I would look at another part, and we can talk about it in more detail. I mean, this is partly bottom-up because it's 3 countries. If I'm inside the Commission, I would be saying, but that's fragmentation, and that's not a good idea, and it will cause problems. And on the other hand, as a human being, I think, well, if somebody doesn't break through that barrier of nothing happening, maybe nothing will ever happen. But I'm undecided. Maybe this debate will decide for me. The real bottom-up is that no one on the street. I stood for election 4 times to the European Parliament, and never once in all of that time did a person come up to me and say, tell me how the Capital Markets Union is doing. And as for banking union, neither. But they would ask, why is the interest rate higher that I pay in my member state? So I think people are aware that there is no free movement of capital in Europe. We say there is, but there isn't. It's borders and barriers all the time. And I would prefer, in addition to what might happen out of this very interesting idea, is that people would talk to their politicians and put pressure to say, this needs to happen, because I need my money to earn more for me, and also my small business needs money for investment. And I think if we could get those two merging, then maybe we would see that breakthrough.
And do you think, you mentioned kind of what the Commission would say about fragmentation. Do you think there's any awareness in the Commission that, you know, as you mentioned, that, you know, maybe bottom up is worth a try, because, or is there such a level of institutional groupthink in the Parliament?
Well, I'm going to defend the Commission, which I never did as an MEP, because I always criticised it, but that's how life rolls. I think the aspiration that we move together is a good one. It's an aspiration. I think maybe there could be a rethink, even not quite just now, but with this proposal, and then the letter from the E6 letter of other member states who want to, in fact, do the same thing as the Commission proposal, but seem to think they can do it together. So maybe with those two initiatives, there would be an idea that this is probably helpful. I'm not saying this on behalf of the Commission. My instinct at the moment is they probably see it as just taking from their objective, which is that everyone moves together. The fear always is that the smaller member states get left behind. It's interesting that this idea would make something stronger from smaller member states. Maybe it's a bit of both. You know, we're in this really difficult place where the luxury of time is not with us, and I think the Minister was very clear about the setting, as the Chair was in the opening remarks. There's a lot of pressure on us, and we have dead money. We have lots of it, but it's actually just fossilising and not being used. I think we need to talk about why it is that member states don't trust each other, or why it is that citizens mightn't trust banking systems. We had in the interim the financial crisis, and I think that has coloured the perception of people around their money and the safety of it. And yet we know that there's a younger generation who think about digitalisation, about crypto, are doing things that maybe aren't the wisest. So that whole area of money and investment is it's moving at a huge pace, and I think Europe needs to, and is, I think, picking up the pace. And I think this event is probably testament to that.
Okay, thanks, Mairead. I'll come back later and follow up with some more questions. Ruta, if I could come to you, the CD&V, proposal, it calls for, talks with The Hague and Luxembourg about how to drive this forward. I'm just wondering, based on your experience politically, as the Minister alluded to, do you think there's any kind of awareness or potential of this actually moving forward in the short to medium term?
Well, if we could convince in 1285 in Bruges, starting with the stock exchange, when it was the family von der Beurs who started then, and convincing other Hanseatic cities to do the same thing, then maybe we can do it also right now. And I think that what Mrs. McGuinness said is the key point. The luxury of time is not with us. We are talking, like Tommy said, about the capital market union for 25 years, maybe even more. And on the one time, it looks like a moonshot, but on the other hand, it's also very urgent. We have the Draghi reports, the letter reports, like the Minister said. We have to invest in decarbonization, in digitalization, in defense. We need 800 billion yearly. And then they say, okay, but 75 can come from the private market, okay. And the problem is not that there is no money in Europe. 33 trillion is available. But we have to bring it into stock markets, and we have to do it. And so that's why we have to do it right now. And if it is not possible with 27 member states, then we can do it with enhanced collaboration. And what we see is that there are different issues, different challenges, different problems. Why that we didn't realize it till now. One of the elements is the supervision, centralizing of the supervision of the bank regulation. Very difficult for member states saying, okay, we will do it together, and we will give some competence to a European level. Tax convergence is also a very big challenge, of course, and we have a lot of differences in our tax systems. And also coming to a common regulatory framework is a third problem that we have to tackle. But we need to move forward, and fragmentation costs money. And now our market in Europe is very fragmented. If I look to the facts and the figures, we have in Europe 35,000 investment funds. 35,000. In the United States, 7,500. We have in the United States 58 trillion available in the stock market. In Europe, 33 trillion is available. We have an average of 400 million in our investment funds. In the United States, 2,700 million. And the problem is also, for example, on innovation. I am a rapporteur for a Biotech Act, and one of the key elements there is that we need money for investment. We have research and development, but when they want to go to the market, the Debt Valley challenges, then we see that there is a lack of money, and there is no lack of money of private research, public research and investment money. In Belgium, 3.4%. We are one of the biggest public spenders of research and investment. The problem is that private money for research and development in Europe is less than in the United States. And so if we think that innovation can be a driving force, then you need money to invest in innovation. And if you want to have this money, then you have to go to the stock markets. And that's the reason why we need this. And so that's the reason why we cannot say, oh, but let's have it as a moonshot, and maybe in 25 years, when we are celebrating 50 years, thinking about this kind of these ideas, then hopefully it will be realized. No, we have to do it right now. And enhanced cooperation can be one of the solutions for that.
But isn't it then all about the signals that government give? Because when I think of Belgium and I think of the Pillar 3 private pension system, it's incredibly small. The tax incentives for private individuals to save more for their private pensions are tiny. You know, the maximum benefit you can get is like 350 euros or 317 euros per year. So in effect, what you have in Belgium is you have the state, through Pillar 1, assuming the vast majority of the risk. Now, I know this is something that the trade unions would just love in Belgium, but the reality is that unless you change the incentives, because, you know, it really annoys me when people say, my God, Belgium is a poor country. Belgium is an incredibly rich country with a very poor government.
Well, that's the difference between, that's what I say about the difference between Belgium and the Netherlands. Belgium is a poor country with rich citizens, and the Netherlands is a rich country with poor citizens. And maybe if we can mix both,
exactly. Exactly, because, you know, every week, God love KBC. I bank with KBC for many years. They're a great bank. They have a great app. It's brilliant. But every week they ring me trying to sell me some other type of insurance. The woman spent, and to me as an Irish person, this is just insane. She spent 40 minutes on the phone last week with me trying to sell me an insurance by telling me, oh, and if you're walking down the street in Leuven and you're walking by a house that's under construction and, you know, some part of the roof falls down and hits me, that, you know, this is really serious and I should be insured for this. And I said, like, I can't believe you've spent 45 minutes trying to convince me to spend 200 euros on this when you could have been trying to convince me to spend 200 euros in some like KBC managed investment fund. It's like, I wouldn't underestimate the cultural mindset. Now, I tell that to a lot of Belgian friends, and they say, well, of course, that's a very serious risk. You could be hit by, so what do we insure against next? Being hit by the bus? I don't really understand. But Hans, come to you for some.
In Leuven, there are other risks to get into the hospital, I can assure you.
Yes, yes. But Hans,
With all the students.
we need some Dutch pragmatism. You're in the private sector now, but you've been previously in the government apparatus. What do you think of this, Benelux approach?
Well, it's a bit what the Vice Prime Minister already said, that you actually have a good example of an attempt of doing this with Euronext, right? It goes beyond Belgium and the Netherlands, including France and many other markets. And there is integration in that sense. And if you look at the financial markets or the broader capital structure in the Netherlands and Belgium, there's some interesting complementarity. Belgium is very strong in financial markets infrastructure. You have Euroclear Bank, you have SWIFT, you have others. The Netherlands has more of a bit of an equity culture and maybe a higher risk-taking culture as well. So I think the regional approach is definitely an interesting one. I think we need to discuss more about this to push it forward. I think both from let's say the financial companies, the investment funds, they would like to see more skill as well. And for investors, it opened up more opportunities. So from every side, it's probably a good idea. Why does it not work? And actually coming to defense of the Commission as well, which I don't do very often as a lobbyist myself, is that I think the biggest barrier to this actually working is outside of the EU competence. It's tax. It's really different tax systems. You have a wealth tax in the Netherlands, you have a shareholder tax in Belgium, you have withholding taxes. And the moment you touch tax in the ECOFIN, and you would know that better than anybody at this moment, discussions just screech to a halt. So I think there's all the reason to actually make this a debate. So let's start between the Benelux countries, because at least there's trust, there's a common history, as you say, there's a basis to build from. But unless you sort the tax piece, I think it's going to be very difficult to make this project work. The other aspect that came up already is indeed a bit the risk culture. In the Netherlands, and I would imagine in Belgium, I've been living here since 2008, so I'm a bit aware of the Belgian culture as well. But I think if you go bankrupt, it's seen as a horrible thing, and we're not going to trust you with more loans or more financing later on. Whereas the reason that in the US there is more risk appetite is that they see that going bankrupt as a starter of an SME or a fast-growing company is a good thing. Because you learn lessons, you won't make that mistake twice. You will go at it again, and I think that's where the risk appetite, indeed, in Europe and in the Benelux as well, is different, and that's holding us back. So tax and risk culture are the two things that I think you really need to work on, and that's not necessarily by legislation, right? So, is it enhanced cooperation? Well, not really. This is behavioral change that we need to get to, and that's where governments can stimulate. But it's the tax part, yes, that's regulation, of course, but that's not even EU regulation. So there's things you can do.
And I think one of the interesting, if we're talking about mobilizing all this capital, I think one of the big, differentiators between, say, the Netherlands and Belgium is the pension system, and in particular the occupational pension system. The public system in the Netherlands pre-funded. It's kind of taken, to be the gold standard by some specialists in Europe. But also, I think the occupational, the Pillar 2 pension, as most people know it by, is significantly larger than in Belgium. So I guess when you don't have people under so much pressure to provide. To have income in retirement because it's pre-funded, or to have a bigger occupational pension, then they can take more risks, I guess, with their
I think that's true, and that's one aspect we didn't talk about yet. But I do think that the let's say how supervisors look at the market and grant investor freedom, and I was involved in negotiation of the AIFMDs, which is a hedge fund directive, and there's an opportunity there to have retail investors actually invest in hedge funds. The Netherlands was open to that because indeed they feel that free disposable income you can afford to lose because your pension is safeguarded, whereas other countries are much more restrictive in allowing retail investors to take more risk in their investments because they fear that they would be eating into their pension and that would be a larger systemic problem later on. And I have experienced that the FSMA is much more restrictive than the AFM in how they look at investment opportunities and risk-taking by retail investors even. So I agree with you, the Dutch pension system, which is pre-funded, does allow the government and the supervisors to give a bit more freedom to retail investors to take more risk.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mairead, I want to come to you because we just, and to kind of follow on the topic about like tackling this risk aversion, because in the Martin Centre we say that, you know, culture, not capital, is the problem in Europe. And we just published a new paper. Feel free to take a copy from outside on your way out. But the title is Old, Rich and Afraid, which, you know, can be said to sum up a lot of things about Europe, particularly its investment strategy. Do you think that, you know, and the paper draws on like behavioral finance, sociology, psychology, do you think that these issues are properly understood in the Commission? Because if they were, shouldn't financial literacy be our number one priority?
Well, it was my number one priority,
Yes.
and I think both equally I have to give credit to the Belgian presidency, led on finance by Vincent. You and I had a really good conference on this topic. We did make it a number one. We worried that at the actual meeting that the ministers wouldn't be interested in it, but they were. And we need to talk more about it. But can I just say a word for that official in KBC? You know, you didn't know what you were dealing with when you called Owen. That's all I'll say. And I don't think they'll be calling you again on that topic. But I think it goes to the heart of this conversation. So at the one level, we talk in acronyms about stuff that matter, the structural stuff around the industry. And we need to talk more about the reality for the people who have money saved and just leave it there because they're not sure what to do with it. And the safest place up to a certain amount is the bank, and they're happy just to sit and not let it grow. So I think we need to have, these conversations need to merge somewhere. We need to constantly talk about, I think the word is, you need to be financially savvy. You don't need to know how the innards of the machine works, but you need to have the confidence to ask the right questions as a citizen. And I always say that in speeches. And I think the current Commissioner, Albuquerque, is doing the same. She's talking about this issue of financial literacy, not in a way that you get a textbook to read, which is 200 pages, which you won't read, but that at an early stage you understand what money is, the value of it, the use of it, its potential to make things better for you, or if you blow it all when you get your first paycheck, that you can be miserable as well. So it's about deeper, and I think it is around psychology and sociology that maybe the solution to some of our problems are, rather than in the financial world where we do focus on necessary things like infrastructure. Now, having just listened to the presentations, it seems to me that there's a lot of goodwill, a good sense of direction about this idea. If it could provide a light on the way forward and not be just an exclusive club to get ahead, then I think it has potential from just the short interventions we've heard here. It's also to remind that there's a lot happening within the Parliament, as you know, and within the Council around the Commission proposals on the Savings and Investment Union. Even the word savings has actually raised the profile of this was CMU, because funny enough, people talk about savings and try and save, and we encourage our children to save. So I think that has actually helped around the points you raise, that financial literacy, which is the word that's used, is, if you look at anything you're reading on LinkedIn by professionals, it's now the number one topic. There's a Professor Lusardi who has dealt with this for decades. She's now much higher profile because everyone's talking about it. Because, you know, I looked at this about being old, and I think I'm probably the oldest, not quite in the room, but certainly on the panel. And in one sense, I look at my children and potentially their children would carry a burden that I'm not carrying because, you know, there will be provision, I hope, for my time. But what about the next generations? Even to think about intergenerational issues, I think would make the debate more real for people. So there's lots of good stuff happening on financial literacy. I think member states are appointing various individuals who lead the conversation. But keep it practical, keep it down to earth, keep it bottom up. Because I worry sometimes when we get our hands, legislators, and I was one, get our hands on an idea, we kind of parcel it in complexity. It's not complex. Last remark around financial literacy. All of us know that there are vulnerable groups in society. And rather than keep people in a vulnerable group, which I worry about sometimes, I think the financial system has incredible power to actually help people who currently are in, if you like, a vulnerable category who need support, to actually be aware of the importance of money, how you can manage it, how you can work with it, how you can get better interest rates when you're borrowing. That the role of financial literacy to lift society generally is enormous. So I think we're in a good starting place already on this, and that I hope that, you know, these ideas that come from events like this can propel this whole topic forward.
And it's interesting because the issue is probably going to get more and more acute, particularly for young people, because now it's possible to invest in almost anything via your phone, and we've seen a very clear, I would say, strategy by, you know, betting companies, crypto companies, particularly via sport, via the Pro League, via the Premier League in the UK. So it's going to be a huge issue. Just to come back to you, what we refer to in Belgium as the Van Petegem state bond of 2023, I think it raised over 20 billion. 22 billion in a week. I think, you know, in a couple of weeks or just over a week. You know, we all invested in the Martin Centre because we're good Christian Democrats, and we like the extra interest rate and the lower withholding tax. But I'm just wondering, like, surely there's more initiatives like that we can use to unlock. I think the problem is a lot of centre-right and right-wing political parties would like to do something like this, but are a little bit afraid because it's immediately pounced on by those on the left, saying, this is a tax break for the rich, this is a tax break for people who don't need it. But if we're serious about utilising this money, surely there's, you know, more kind of incentives. If we can spend 1.5% of GDP in Belgium on subsidising company cars, surely we can have more financial incentives to get people to invest or to encourage people to invest more.
Yes, I agree, because the final goal is that this kind of money is used for investments in future-proof investments in digitalization, decarbonization, innovation, and so on. And so that is the reason why we need this kind of money. And the state bond proved that this is possible. First of all, it proved that there is a lot of money available. This was also an important, and is also an important signal towards the markets, because our public budget is not in a very good shape, but it shows that the Belgian citizens have the capacity for funding this.
Yeah.
And this is, for the external markets, a very important issue. I was negotiating the government of Yves Le Terme in 2011, when we had a downgrading of the agencies. And then Le Terme took the first initiative with the state bond. And then it was immediately a signal of calming down the financial markets, who were at that time hitting a lot of countries. Greece was under fire, Spain was under fire, Portugal was under fire, and then also Belgium could become under fire. So it was a very important external signal. And in Belgium, we have more or less 300 billion in saving accounts. We have 300 billion in investment funds. We have 100 billion in shares. So there is a lot of money available that we can use more and use more actively than we do right at the moment. And I want to come back also on the Benelux idea, because in Europe we often say Belgium is the biggest of the small countries and the Netherlands is the smallest of the big countries. But together we have a GDP as big as Russia or Spain or South Korea. If we could combine this, we have a common possible stock market that can compare with Germany. Not against Germany, but I mean, it is not a proposal for more fragmentation. No, it's a proposal for creating more bigger markets in Europe. We don't need necessarily to have one market.
Yeah.
Also in the United States, it's not one market, but less than in Europe.
And do you think as well, just a quick follow-up, that what that state bond and the demand for it in 2023 also showed is that, and this is not uncommon in smaller economies, is that the banks, you know, the large pillar Belgian banks essentially do not even have to work very hard to get this money in, that there is a real
keep it simple.
Yeah, that it's a real lack of competition, and it's what was alluded to earlier. We really don't have a cross-border banking.
Well, that's quite important, and I think also a quite important condition in this kind of proposals. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
We had in Europe also the pan-European pension funds.
Yeah.
And it was a good idea. It is a very good idea, but it is worked out in a bad sense. And so, to quote our Prime Minister, if you have an idea about a horse, don't make it into a camel. And that is what we often do in this kind of proposals. And so that is something that we have to avoid. Keep it simple. And that was what Vincent van Petegem did as Minister of Finance, making a proposal that was quite simple, that was applicable for the banks, for the consumers, and that has the trust of the people. And of course, you talked about literacy. That is a very big important point. You talked about the culture, and there is a difference of culture, and we cannot create a new European Act for having another culture in that sense. But we can work on it, and I think for a new generation, they are more open for this. In Belgium, we start in our party now a new campaign for having discussions with citizens. Morgen beter, tomorrow better. And one of the remarkable points here is that young people think that they have to look for themselves in the future. And so we are coming from a generation that thinks the society, the state, they will all do it for us. And of course, we have another system of pension, another pension system than in the Netherlands, although we have a more mixed one. And but this creates also opportunities. I have 3 young children, 2 are studying at the university. I hope they are studying at university. But they think really that they have to look to take care of themselves. And so using this kind of instruments is one part of it.
And it's interesting when you talk about the culture, and because I think it's an issue for centre-right parties throughout Europe, is that, you know, if we are really interested in saying what we mean about, you know, developing capital markets union, etc., etc., then it means we also have to consider our position on what we would say were kind of a lot of our fundamental economic policies in the past. So, you know, can we really be serious about, you know, an investment union if we consider, if we still, you know, give so many tax benefits and special tax treatment to property or to income from property? You know, if we're really interested about driving investment change, then income derived from investments for people should have a lower tax rate than income derived from property, particularly income derived from a second or third property. Because the young people I talk to who are like, you know, teenagers and in their 20s, they might see their grandparents with, you know, their nice house by the Flemish coast and a house that their uncle has in Spain. But that's not going to be their reality unless they inherit it. But there's going to be a huge proportion of the population that won't. So unless, as the centre right, we really start to reimagine what we think are the pillars of economic security, I'm not sure, about our children and our grandchildren and how they will do. Hans, before I open it up to the floor, I just want to ask you one last question. Because we really wanted to be specific in the paper we wrote in addition to the Benelux Bourse idea. One of the issues which we quickly saw was that the power of incentives. So if you look at occupational or personal pension systems, and why I keep banging on about pensions is because the potential pool of capital is so large, and because it's invested for the long term, it's a long-term horizon, is if you change the default, you know, at the moment people have to opt in, but if people are automatically enrolled and they have to actively opt out, you know, the data would show that enrollment rates went from, I think, 37% to over 80%. So, because I know you have a lot of experience with financial institutions and stuff like that, do you think that that could, you know, transform the Pillar 2 section? Because we've seen it actually, it started to be introduced in Ireland. It's a long-standing arrangement in Australia.
Well, in the Netherlands, actually, you don't have that, right? You're almost obliged to put into it. So I am a great believer in incentives, and to a certain extent, the high inflation post-COVID was a great incentive for not putting your money in the bank because you realized that you were losing 7-8% just by doing nothing, basically. So I do believe incentives have to be applied. I've done a lot of work on, when I was still at the Ministry of Finance, about how do you get people to invest in products and what are the costs of products, and literally, like we did the financiële bijsluiter for the Dutch speaking amongst us, like a 2-page document that really says what are the risks, etc. And what that research then, which we conducted at the Ministry of Finance, showed is that people don't understand risk very well. They, by definition, say high risk is bad, right? And we tried all sorts of different ways to visually depict how you can invest without thinking that high risk is bad. And I think it's really important indeed to have the financial education that you show. These type of investments are for the long term, right? So you should not get nervous about short-term movements. And the education in the Netherlands, we have a very high ambassador talking about financial education. That's the Queen. So Maxima is very active on financial education, and that actually does work. But I do think we need to make it easy for people to invest. I saw one stat, and I don't know how current this is, but if you invest in an investment fund in Italy, it always goes through a bank, and the bank immediately banks 4% commission charge. Yeah. So by definition, your investment fund already has to outperform the 4% before you even make any money. In the Netherlands, where we have a ban on provisions, and this is a bit of a push that the Dutch have been doing for a long time, actually there's a lot more investment in investment funds because the charges are a lot lower, so you immediately see the benefits of it. An insurance wrapper, if all of the costs of the insurance are taken in the beginning, that has a massive impact on the long-term returns on your insurance product. So we banned that in the Netherlands, and it actually worked. And people said there's an advice gap that is created by it, or people will get discouraged from investing. Not true at all. It just enhanced the returns. So I think talking about these things, and these are of course boring things to talk about, especially when you talk to young people. But I think hammering on about it, I think does help, and I think that employers actually have a role to play there as well. In the Netherlands, when you start a job, the employer will actually talk to you about what the pension entails and how that works. I'm an employer in Belgium. We don't do that to our staff about the Belgian pension systems. Don't make me go on tax in Belgium because I have some other ideas there, but I'll leave those outside of this discussion at the moment. But incentives definitely work.
It depends on what kind of tax.
I just, I tried to bring in a ban on inducements. I don't know if you remember that conversation.
You had one country that was supportive.
I know. I had one in the bag, but they were there anyway. But the rest, no, didn't happen.
What most people don't realize is that, and this is why, you know, psychology, history is very important, is that Italian households and businesses save about 400 billion euros a year. They're they're some of the wealthiest households in Europe. But what people don't realize is that there is a specific article in the Italian constitution which empowers the government to act, you know, as kind of a facilitator of people's savings. And of course, that constitution was written, you know, 1946, 1947, so it's perfectly understandable in that, but it shows how deeply ingrained the culture is. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for a Q&A, and then we will wrap it up. So, yeah, we have one here, 3. Yeah. Just the mic.
Thank you. And thanks all for your insights. We've touched upon like the financial technicalities, upon the psychology, behavioral part. We didn't really speak about the macroeconomics of deeper capital unions, and hence the Benelux proposal. The reality today is that since the great financial crisis, most of the excess savings in Europe are invested in the US. And when you look at recent figures, and there's a very interesting Bruegel paper of 2 weeks ago on that, the actual European stocks are now almost half owned by US investors, and those are not US any investors, those are basically a little oligopoly of hedge funds. I mean, it's the BlackRocks and the Vanguards and the like. So if we are to deepen this capital union, how do we make sure that this serves a reshoring of European savings, and that it's not just preparing, a brilliant gift to whatever foreign capital investors? And it burns me a bit because I'm, quite universalist in my mindset and all of that. But is a deeper capital movements in Europe? How do you kind of balance that with open capital markets on a global scale? And should we not be too naive on that front?
Okay, thank you. We just have another here, and then we'll come. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm a former student from the KU Leuven, where I studied economics, and for some of the people who have known Vic van Rompuy, the father of Herman, I was enjoying your conversation, but I'm actually completely puzzled. You have a bottom-up initiative. I really don't get it. Hans said there is Euronext, we have a Brussels Stock Exchange, we have an Amsterdam Stock Exchange. So could you please explain where you would start? I mean, because the problems are well known, but how would you go about by setting up this? So like, a kind of business plan of setting up a Bourse, some ideas where you would start bottom up. Huh?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. We'll take one last question.
Thank you very much. I have one final question adding to the previous question to all speakers, to all panelists. How would this Benelux Bourse, what would it try different? Would it do different versus what the Commission has tried in the past with its capital market union, and then the rebranding on Albuquerque as the saving and investment union? And what would it do difference versus what Euronext tried 25 years ago and failed at?
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe they're all interconnected. Hans, I'm going to come to you just on Euronext because we talked about it last week. I remember when, you know, when all this happened, Antwerp merged with with Brussels Exchange, then we had Euronext in Brussels and Amsterdam, and there was a lot of excitement, and, you know, we were really going to, you know, have a capital markets union, etc. So what went wrong, or why hasn't that happened, I guess, to a layperson, kind of?
Well, from an outside perspective,
Yeah.
of course, but and indeed the three questions are, I think, interlinked. So Euronext has actually done a lot of integration because they use the same technology, they use the same rule books. They're a broker that you ask to do a trade on Euronext Amsterdam can plug into Euronext Brussels with the exact same computer, say simply, as he does in Amsterdam, and the costs are exactly the same. So on the back office side, there's actually a lot of integration. Why it doesn't happen yet fully, again, has to do with tax and also listing rules that change a bit country by country. So to answer the question, like what would you do differently, I would really try to get to a single platform where all of the Benelux companies are listed jointly. So you really combine, because now you have to go to another exchange to invest in the Belgian companies via Euronext Belgium. The back office might work the same, but it's not one platform that if you look at what shares can I invest in through this exchange, you have a Dutch version and you have a Belgian version. So I think really trying to get to one pool of capital, and that's maybe then a bit, sorry, I go a bit beyond the question, but that's maybe a bit the answer that where I don't think it's bad if there's investment possibilities outside of Europe, because diversification is a very important part. If you want to invest wisely, you shouldn't just invest in one zone. So in general, I think diversification is good. Inward investment, which is also very large, is also good because we also need the capital. So I think that international flow is not a problem as such. What I think could help Europe is if you really have one pool of, well, let's say, supply of capital and demand of capital coming together in one exchange. And that's not the case because we do have a fragmented exchange landscape in Europe. So trying to, and you can do it in all sorts of different technical ways, but trying to get one pool of capital where if an investor is keen to allocate his capital, so invest, you can see all of the companies that you can invest in Europe in one go. I think that you could actually make it more competitive with the American Stock Exchange than it is now in quite a fragmented space that you have. So where you would start is really have one place where all the companies in Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg are listed jointly.
Yeah. That's just a clue. Yeah.
At the European level, how difficult it is to finally have that single capital market. We're in a discussion that we also now have at the European level. It's all about the market integration, and we really want to make the steps forward. And it always comes back to the red lines of individual member states, and they each have their own topic where they do not want to change their opinion. For example, about now the supervision. Will it be a single supervision or will there be still a national supervision? That is now the big discussion that we have, where the Commission now needs a political guidance from the member states to know where we're heading to. And you can just hope that Benelux Bourse can actually pave the way a little bit on showing how can we harmonize, what could be the steps forward. We have now already in Europe, for example, the Nordic capital markets. There is also now Croatia, Slovenia, and some other non-EU countries also forming a capital market. I think that are the steps forward where we can learn from the field how you can harmonize what the necessary steps are to actually come to a more integrated capital market.
Okay. Wouter, I'll let you respond if you want to respond. Final response, and then
I think that a lot of things already have been answered. Of course, we have Euronext, but that's just the stock market. What we don't have is a convergence on tax issues, like you said. What we don't have is the regulatory framework. the supervision. That is what we don't have, and there is a difference in the way the way that the Belgian FSMA is working and that their Dutch colleagues are working. And we have also different regulations. So these are at least three elements that we have to converge, and that we can converge in a Benelux Bourse.
Yeah.
So the bottom up is the Benelux towards the European Union. It's not, the private sector. It's actually the public authorities of Benelux that would launch this initiative, right? That would be a Benelux initiative. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of work to do, huh?
Yusuf Kobo, he asked about the saving investment union and the capital market union. There is a reason why the Commission said we will call it the saving and investment union. That is because there is a lot of averse towards member states to have a common ground with 27 member states. And so if we have not a lot of options. One option is we do it with 27 member states, but there is no time to lose. We can say, okay, we will work on a new moonshot, but how many years do we have to go? We can say, okay, we keep it as it is, or we can say, okay, let's do it with enhanced cooperation, let's do it with some member states. And if other member states are doing the same, or they want to go with us, no issue, no problem. But at least we have, with Euronext, we have a common ground to do it.
Yeah.
There's something to start from.
Yeah. Okay, Mairead, final word to you.
I'm going to pick up your word about puzzled. What puzzles me is that in my time as commissioner, and before that I'm sure as well, political leaders were all in favour of CMU and spoke about it warmly and lovingly, and then forgot about it when they went back home. And it puzzles me that somebody isn't saying that out loud to leaders. I think this is a hugely political issue which needs, it needs both. It needs a top leadership and bottom-up pressure in order for it to work. It needs to be demystified because it's full of jargon, and it needs to be rattled home, as your first question said, around what's happening with our money today. We're saving it, we're not getting the value from those savings, other places are benefiting. It's not that we're going to ring fence the money and only invest in Europe, but we want to make sure that our citizens will have the opportunity to put their money where our mouth is, if I can use that distorted expression. Maybe an idea with the savings account, because I don't like the word cross-border. We use it all the time, and we talk about a single market. It is inconsistent language, and it creates a barrier. I took it out of speeches that were written in the past. I said, let's not use cross-border in a single market context. Why don't we have this idea of the savings account, a pan-European savings account, with a taxation rate that's common across Europe, that people might get that, actually. People are tuned in to these realities. If it's KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple is enough. And then, you get the conversation going, and we haven't made a row about taxation because it's very easy to do that, but I'm sure we'll get sufficient responses. Last point around the concept, and I've been kind of more warming to it as I hear about it. I just worry about it happening in parallel with a lot of conversations around everybody meant to jump together, because we have these other member states who've come together with their ideas, and some of the larger member states. We have this concept, which is probably quite workable at the ground level, and we have the commissions and proposals. And I just wouldn't like to see the fragmentation of our time with all of this. On the positive, if this can show leadership and a direction of travel and a capacity for change around some thorny issues, why not give it a little bit of encouragement while nodding to my colleagues in the Commission to say, you keep going too, because we'd rather have 27 move together than, just the few, but maybe none moving together is even worse than if we just have the few. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mairead. I think that's a good place to finish. Yeah, round of
Good conclusion.
Yeah. I want to thank all our speakers for taking time out of their busy days. A special congratulations to Mairead on being recently appointed EU Special Envoy on Religious Freedom. I'm absolutely starving. There's lunch outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure, look.